Update Air Superiority has hit the live server and it has brought 4 highly anticipated jets into the game: the Su-27, the F-15, the Gripen, and the Mirage 4000. Today I will be covering the F-15, tomorrow will be the Su-27, and probably Saturday the Gripen. The F-15 played out pretty much exactly how I expected a Sparrow F-15 to compete in an R-27ER's world. And by that I mean it really doesn't compete that well at all against R-27ERs. But we'll talk about some positives of the F-15 first. It has probably the best, maybe second best flight model for air realistic battle. Maybe it's not the best 1v1 dogfighter, no, but as far as just zipping around the furballs, keeping your speed, switching targets, the F-15 has a fantastic flight model for the typical air realistic battle combat. It accelerates well, it stays fast, it has good energy retention, and it pulls good at pretty much every speed except really low speeds. And when the goal of top tier ARB is to not get slow in the first place, it's got a lot of things going for it in the flight performance department, I will give it that, and I am very satisfied with the flight performance of this aircraft. It does rip a little bit, as you saw in the intro. It is much better than what it was on the dev server, but even still, the slightest raw mouse input in certain situations can result in an awkward maneuver for the plane that results in the wingtip just kind of snapping off. Nothing you can really do about it. It doesn't happen that often, but it does still happen, and it's really frustrating when it does. There's some positive and some negative with the radar. The radar itself is overall pretty good, but it's certainly not the best, and combine that with the fact you're using Sparrows and you have just a mediocre weapon system here for top tier considering what the competition gets. What you have is a radar that in many ways is better than the F-16 radar, but in many ways it also isn't. It is better in the sense that you can actually change your lock type after you have already launched a missile, which is something that the F-16C can do, but none of the other F-16s really can, so that's a good feature to have. And I will say that in the pulse Doppler scan, the non-head-on pulse Doppler mode, it is very difficult to notch. In fact, it holds lock pretty well at almost all angles. It can be notched, yes, but it is extremely specific of a notch window, and you've got to be hitting that 90-degree pretty damn perfectly. The problem is that the Sparrow, on the other hand, is not so difficult to notch, and even though your radar might be holding lock, the missile sometimes is just going to lose track because it is getting notched itself. The Sparrow Seeker is not the best when you compare it to something like an ER or an R-27R, and that kind of just goes without saying, but you really feel it sometimes, especially if you're coming off of playing with the R-27 and you go to a Sparrow and you just lose lock a lot more often and your missile stops tracking or just straight up whiffs and misses the target. That is going to happen with these AIM-7s. That being said, we do have to put it into perspective. While it is true the R-27ER absolutely stomps the Sparrow is still the second best missile at top tier, which just makes it that much more insulting that people with 530Ds and Skyflash Super Temps and other missiles of that variety have to go up against R-27ERs, but it is what it is. It's just, there's a pretty obvious theme to this video if you hadn't already noticed. The R-27ER is very obviously superior to everything else in every single way possible by a pretty significant margin, but before this update there was at least the saving grace of you could only have 2 R-27ERs on a single aircraft at a time. Well, now that the Su-27 and the J-11 are in the game and you have R-27s absolutely everywhere, or the threat of R-27s absolutely everywhere, it's become a lot more blatant and it's become much more frustrating. Aside from the radar missiles, you do get 4 9Ms, and 9Ms are still fantastic missiles. I would personally still prefer the R-73 over the 9M, but the 9M is great, and you can make an argument that it is better than the R-73. I would just disagree with you. I think that's more of a matter of subjective though. Most of your kills are going to come from the AIM-9Ms, and if I could take 6 AIM-9Ms and just leave the Sparrows at home, I would, because they're just much more useful. They help you be a lot more active in your match, and they are overall, again, just a more reliable way of getting kills right now, especially in the meta of furball 16 vs 16. Having really fast missiles that get to the target quickly, or having fire and forget missiles, that's your goal, and the AIM-9M is certainly a powerful and potent fire and forget missile. One of the absolute best things about the F-15 is you get a lot of countermeasures. On mixed you get 120 flare and 120 chaff, totaling 240 countermeasures, and that's not the most in top tier, but it's a lot and you're probably not going to run out, which is a breath of fresh air considering there is up to what is it, 150 missiles in a given match now or more, many of which are IRCCM, and you're going to be popping a lot of countermeasures to evade them. And so the legacy top tier planes like the MiG-29A and the F-16A only having 60 total countermeasures, it's really not going to cut it, and having the upgrade of the F-15's countermeasure count is certainly welcome, and is honestly something that really makes or breaks a top tier jet right now. And that's sad to say, but in my experience, I just would much rather have a lot more countermeasures rather than having a little bit better flight performance. Overall, is the F-15 good? Absolutely. This plane is fantastic at top tier. Don't get me wrong, when you actually put it into perspective of everything else in top tier, it is certainly a top 3 jet right now and a real contender in the top tier matchmaker. That being said, the Su-27 is just so much better than everything right now because of its missile loadout kit being blatant bullshit. You get 4 R-73s, you get 6 R-27Es, and you get still a really good flight model. A better flight model in 1 vs. 1s than the F-15, especially so when you combine it with HMD R-73s, but not necessarily better in a normal ARB match. There is a little bit of a difference, you probably know what I'm talking about. But even then, the Su-27 flight model is still more than adequate for an ARB game. It keeps speed well enough, it gets speed well enough, and the missile kit again is just absolute blatant bullshit, and everybody else has to deal with it, and nobody else has an answer to these missiles. It was tolerable with something like the MiG-29, especially so the SMT, and when the MiG-29's got flight model nerfs, because the MiG-29 flight model was just blatantly outclassed by the F-16s, which pretty much everybody has an F-16. And not only that, but the missiles were limited. You couldn't have a billion gorillion of the R-27s, and at the same time still carrying 4 R-73s. But the Su-27 and the J-11 allows you to do just that. And so yes, the F-15 might be a really fantastic top tier aircraft. Something like the Su-27 is so blatantly meta right now that I really don't want to play it. Why would I? I would much rather be in the Su-27, and I have had a good deal of fun playing around with that thing, as well as the Gripen. So I'm going to tell you guys right now, if you're looking for what you should grind first, what you want to grind right away, number 1 I would say is going to be the Su-27, and number 2 I'd probably say the Gripen. The Gripen is the most fun in my opinion, but overall the Su-27 is probably going to be the most effective in a top tier match consistently. Basically, too long didn't read for this video. The F-15, fantastic plane, great weapons, great flight performance, but ultimately it comes down to the R-27ER and its consequences, and we are still living with those consequences going into 2024, and it is what it is. We'll just have to carry on. Keep this bullshit, by the way. I kill this MiG-29. I'm anticipating him getting that R-73 off HMD. He does, and I absolutely just cannot flare it. Great gameplay. I really enjoyed myself on that one. Outplayed 10 out of 10. Happy grinding, and I'll see you tomorrow with the Su-27.